same time, the typical family's income has gone up just 16%.
There's about $1 trillion in federal student loans outstanding and another $100 billion in private student loans. And the sluggish economic recovery makes that burden even harder to bear for graduates like Ashley Perviler from North Carolina.
I'm working in retail right now. I have a college degree, and I'm working at Macy's in the ladies' shoe department, and I'm just like, what am I doing? I'm $30,000 in debt. I'm 23 years old. Like, it's insane.
That debt hurts the economy because it prevents young people from buying a home or starting a business. So today the president signed an executive order making an additional 5 million borrowers eligible for the administration's pay-as-you-earn program, which caps monthly payments at 10% of income and forgives unpaid debt after 20 years. Student loans are one of the kitchen table issues Democratic candidates are highlighting this election year. Strategist Jeff Guerin says that 70% of voters with student debt say it's one of their biggest economic worries.
The challenge of getting ahead economically is still the dominant issue for voters. Our research shows that when Democrats really play offense on these issues, they have the winning hand. And college affordability and the burden of student debt is a central part of that debate and that discussion.
This week, Senate Democrats will bring up a bill that would allow people to refinance their federally backed student loans. But since reduced interest payments would bring in less money to the Treasury, Democrats are proposing to offset the cost by closing tax loopholes for wealthy individuals.
And I want Americans to pay attention to see where their lawmakers' priorities lie. Lower tax bills for millionaires or lower student loan bills for the middle class. This should be a no-brainer.
Last year, Congress voted with big bipartisan majorities to prevent student loan rates from jumping. But now the fight has returned to the familiar partisan standoff about taxes. Democrats think the contrast will help them in the fall, and the president wasn't shy about making the partisan argument today.
One of the things I want all the voters out there to consider, particularly parents who are struggling trying to figure out how am I going to pay my kids' college education, take a look and see who is it that's fighting for you and your kids, and who is it that's not?
Today, House Speaker John Boehner blasted the president's executive order, saying it won't reduce the cost of college or help graduates find a job. And in the Senate, the ranking member of the Education Committee, Tennessee Republican Lamar Alexander, rejected the Democrats' refinancing legislation.
To pay for all this, we're going to raise individual income taxes by $72 billion. Now, this is the familiar proposal. This is the class warfare tax increase that the Senate has rejected 8 times. There's nobody in this Senate that thinks this will pass the Senate the 9th time it's brought up.
So the usual stalemate framed with the usual rhetoric. With the Senate Democrats' bill unlikely to pass, the president is left with an issue and his executive order. But even that won't help any borrowers anytime soon, and certainly not before the next election. The president's expansion of the pay-as-you-earn program will not go into effect before December of 2015. That's how long it takes for the Education Department to get the new regulations into effect. Mara Eliason, NPR News, the White House.
We wanted to figure out why college costs have been rising so much, and Anya Kamenetz with the NPR Ed team joins me now to break down the numbers. Anya, why don't we take the example of a working-class student at a 4-year public university getting no help from mom and dad? What do the numbers look like?
Yeah, so we often hear, in my day, I worked my way through college, why can't you? And if you look at the numbers, in 1981-82, the average cost to go to a 4-year public institution in dollars back then was $2,800, tuition, fees, room and board. And the maximum Pell Grant award, that's free money from the government, was about $1,800. So that leaves a student with about $1,000 to cover out of pocket. Mm-hmm. And, the minimum wage back then was about $3.35 an hour. So you could pretty easily cover your expenses and have extra money to spend if you work full-time in the summer or just 6 hours a week all year round.
So that was back in 81, 82. What about now?
Well, so today, the 4-year public university is going to cost about $18,000 for an in-state student. The maximum Pell Grant is only $5,550. So you are left with about $13,000 to cover out of your own pocket. And the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. So that's about 34 hours a week, every single week of the year.
If you're working.
If you're working to cover it. And, that's pretty much full-time hours. And research shows that if you work more than 20 hours a week as a full-time student, it's really hard to graduate on time.
Well, sticking with the 4-year public institutions right now, what accounts for that steep rise in tuition there?
Well, there's this perfect storm of effects. A big part part of it is the decrease in public funding. So we can see a pretty much one-to-one correlation between recession years, for example, education budgets get cut and colleges pass on the rising cost to students.
Okay, so we've been talking about public universities, Anya. Now let's pivot to private universities. And by way of example, why don't we pick Stanford? If you look at the cost of a year at Stanford, how does it compare now with, say, 30 years ago?
Well, in 1984-85, in today's dollars, it cost $31,000 a year to go to Stanford. In 2014-2015, again, this is constant dollars, it costs $57,000 a year. So that's almost double the cost.
Almost double. And what accounts for that?
Well, the cost drivers in the private sector are different from the public sector. They really feel the need to compete on prestige, and so they are engaged in these sort of perks wars, that these are spending on amenities, on the physical plant, on technology, on research labs, and there are increased personnel costs that mostly comes on the administrative side.
So the universities would say you're getting more for your money now than you were 30 years ago.
Well, you know, that's certainly a debate, and the fact is that the value of a college degree is higher than it's ever been. The question is, though, is college affordable for those who really need it? Is it serving as an engine of opportunity?
You do wonder if, as tuition has doubled, as you say, nearly doubled, what about professor salaries? Have they kept pace with tuition costs?
You know, professor salaries are really a bugaboo for college cost increases, but in point of fact, colleges have been able to hold the line on instructional costs, and they've done that by using adjuncts. You know, these are the part-time, the graduate students who teach about half of all classes now across higher education. And so while there have been higher costs for benefits and for pensions at public institutions in particular, faculty salaries have been flat, and you really can't blame professor salaries for the rise in tuition.
Could you make the claim that increased levels of student aid are bringing down the cost of tuition?
Well, you know, there